Excellent. Okay. Well, I've been turning for about 13 years, and about 6 months ago, and just going through the internet, I came across an intriguing project that basically takes a flat board and makes a bowl out of it. It intrigued me because you don't have to deal with a big log and a lot of waste, and then have a log warp or crack on you, and then you have to store it away. You partially cut it, store it, let it dry, and so working with dried wood has some advantages. I know there are a lot of turners who enjoy cutting wet wood because it really turns nice and sweet and easy, and dry wood certainly does make a lot of dust and smoke, but you have a stable project when you're done. Now, I've done a couple of segmented turnings as well, and with segmented turning, as I'm sure you all know, you have to cut small little pieces of wood at very specific angles to create a circle, and the angles depend on whether you want 12 or 16 pieces, etc., inside the circle, and you can make some fancy things. So you make a set of rings and then stack the rings on top of each other. Well, this is another technique of making those rings. Instead of cutting out individual little segments and gluing them together, you can cut a circle right out of the board. And you cut the circle at an angle so that the bottom portion is a little bit narrower than the top portion and will sit on the next ring that you cut out from the board, and then you can just stack them on top of each other. You still have to flatten them like you do a segmented piece. Then you glue them together and you get some very nice pieces. Now, just getting a piece of maple or mahogany and cutting it would just be a little bit boring by itself. So I've made some bowls in which I've made my own board, and you can end up with a piece similar to this. Now, one of the intriguing things about this, I'm sorry. Ah, okay. So the camera picks it up? Okay. There we go. So by making your own board up by gluing pieces together and then cutting concentric rings, you can make a nice pattern. Thanks, John. Why don't we go ahead and go to the slides. I decided to make a slide program initially because it would save a lot of time in showing you the setup, and it would take too long and make an awful lot of dust to cut all these rings. So basically what I started off with, and let me get a little pointer here. What I started off with is making a board that I glued together, make some concentric rings. Next slide. There we go, okay. And stacking these rings together, next slide. And then you can see that you can get a bowl out of it. Now, part of the problem with just using a single board is that you have to cut these almost at a 45-degree angle so it'll stack properly. And that makes a very straight side, which is rather boring. Can we dim the lights a little bit? Thank you. Okay. So you end up with a fairly straight side here. And that makes, to me, a sort of an uninteresting bowl, but it is a bowl. Next slide, please. So after doing a little bit more research, I came up, and it certainly is not my original idea, with making two boards. So what I basically do is make one board with the wood twice as long as it is wide, cut it in half, and then you can make two sets of rings. You cut out one ring from this side, impose it upon the other side so you get the correct dimension, and cut out a second ring. Take this second ring, bring it back to the first board, cut your third ring. And then the third ring gives you the size for your fourth ring, and by alternating back and forth, go ahead, Mike, you can then stack this up. You end up with two discs in the bottom, again. And you end up with a bowl that has some curvature to it and has some nice shape. So you use two boards and move them back and forth, alternate them. Go ahead. Now, in order to figure out the angles, what was safe, I spent a lot of time, just playing around with some graph paper. This is 1/4-inch graph paper, and I just drew a 30-degree line. And what has to happen is that the bottom of the first ring has to sit on top of the second ring. And so when I dropped down a vertical line to check that out, I found out that right in here, where you can see it's a little shaded, there's an overlap. And this doesn't account for the kerf in your saw or whatever you're cutting with. So this is maybe about 1/2 or 3/4 of an inch, and then by the time you get an overlap and then subtract a kerf from that, you're working with a rather thin piece of wood. So I found out, through trial and error also, that going less than a 30-degree angle is awfully difficult. You can't make it just up and down very well. You can go with two pieces, but by the time you cut your third piece of wood, it's going to be so narrow, it would be very difficult for it to stack on top of each other. Next slide, please. Now, if you go with a 45-degree angle and you try to superimpose the bottom of the first ring on the top of the second ring, you'll see here that there is no overlap. So a 40-degree angle is pretty safe. Now, again, this doesn't account for the kerf, but you have enough leeway here, and these are each 3/4 inch thick pieces of wood. Each one of these squares here is 1/4 inch. So you're dealing with 3/4 inch thicknesses of wood, and so a 40-degree angle is pretty safe, Mike. And now here, I decided to make a curve and then two pieces of wood. I'm not sure how well that shows up, but if you take the first ring up here, and this is rings 1, 3, 5, and 7, and then rings 2, 4, 6, and 8, if you alternate in the technique that I was describing just a few minutes ago, you can take the first and second ring, even though it's fairly vertical, and they'll be okay. The third ring, you get a little bit of overlap, but now the fourth ring and the fifth, the sixth, the seventh, and the eighth gives you a fairly good amount of separation, even with a curve, so you can then stack them on top of each other and make this curve. So just as a rule of thumb and with trial and error, if you want to do this technique, you could probably try it with a 25-degree angle initially, but then quickly you need to go to 30 degrees and 40 degrees and 45-degree angles. And if each layer is changed at a 5 degrees of angle each time, you can get this gradually changing curve on your board. Go ahead. Now, in order to cut the angles, I went to a machinist and had him cut this bar for me to get this. And I wanted my kerf to be just 1/8 of an inch so that I wouldn't take up much wood. And he stamped it in the angles, and this was just my first trial and error that I ended up with 18, 27, 29, and 32. The angles aren't all that critical, so you have a little bit of leeway. But at any rate, these were the angles. I had to make sure this bar was absolutely parallel to the wood so that these angles were accurate. And then we made a cutting tool out of a file. So we got a file. Now, again, this file is going into a wood that's curved, so you couldn't make it very wide here at the tip, otherwise it would interfere with the curve of the wood. The problem is there was enough lateral pressure that the file kept breaking. I also tried an 1/8 of an inch rod, and that didn't work very well either. There's just too much pressure on it, and the rod's either bent or cracked. Next. And you can go ahead and skip the next one. So I'll go to the tool in just a minute. Now, this is a board here just to show you the process from the beginning, where I've glued up, just took several pieces of wood, and you need a really nice saw blade so that you can cut this wood almost as if it were planed, and it will cut a nice fine glue-up edge for you. And so I just ran boards through and ripped them up in various widths and just put a mixture of different boards to make a pleasing design. This is the board. You see I still have the ends there. I haven't glued it up yet, so they're still hanging off on the other side. And now I'm gluing it up, standard process. And I've used Type Bond 2 and Type Bond 3. And I really haven't found very much difference between the two. I've tried both. It doesn't seem to make a whole lot of difference as far as setting up and easeability or strength. So I think you can alternate the two. But I've used cauls and a lot of clamps to try to get this together. And as you can see, this board is 12 inches wide by 24 inches long. Next one. Now here I've divided the wood in half with a pencil mark, and you can barely see it here, but I have scribed 2 concentric circles, one here and one over there. Now I've cut out the 2 concentric circles, and one of the problems I found is it's easy to get this side mixed up with that side. Even though I've tried to make them symmetrical, they're not going to be absolutely symmetrical, and you want your lines to line up. So if I put some sort of a scribe mark over here and a scribe mark over there, at least I can keep the boards oriented. Now I have to keep on re-scribing it because now this wood is somewhat irregular. You know, when you glue 2 pieces of wood together, they're never going to be absolutely parallel, and you've got glue oozing out. So I have to take it over, and I have taken it to get it planed and sawed, but I found out it's just as easy. I can do this myself on a lathe, just very carefully, just get the, using our standard woodworking tools to make the boards nice and even, essentially plane it and sand it so that everything is regular. But then, of course, you're going to sand off these marks, so I have to put a mark on the edge, and then once it's finished, put the mark back on just to keep my orientation. And this is the board roughed up. Again, you can see the glue hanging off. It's not very smooth yet. I haven't rounded off the edges. Now I've cut a dovetail, go ahead, in there. But you can also go ahead and use a faceplate on the wood. So I've done it both ways, but I find the dovetail actually makes it a little bit easier. And it works very well, and I usually use the jaws in the expansion mode. Go ahead. Now this is a tool that I ended up finally developing. It's cut at an angle. I found that the 1/8 of an inch thick file did not hold up very well, and I'm not a metal person. I don't know a whole lot about metal, so I was trying to figure out what I can use. So I just went to Home Depot and picked up this drill rod, and I just turned it around and sharpened the back end of it and stuck this end in a piece of wood. And made a tool for myself. It's not the best piece of steel. It works, but I do have to sharpen it with each cut, and there's probably better quality steel that I could use. I just don't know that much about it, and I haven't been able to find like a high-speed steel that's long enough that you can stick in the handle. Most of them they sell is only about 4 to 6 inches, which doesn't give me enough working room. So I've got to have something that's at least 10 inches long so I can bed it in the handle to hold off, and I haven't been able to find that. So if somebody knows something more about metal than I do, let me know. So at any rate, I sharpened the tool so that it has a bevel on one side. And this is the top side. At first, I started with it at a 90-degree angle. But as it entered the wood and you're going at an angle, I found that this corner goes into the wood first. And it goes in a whole lot easier if you put a slight bevel on this area. So there's a slight bevel on the top side, and then on the underneath side, it's just like any other type of a scraper blade, basically. So you're using this as a scraper to a large extent. And now to get an angle on that wood, at first I had that metallurgist, that machinist cut that angle, but that was too expensive, and then it wouldn't hold. I couldn't adapt it to now the thicker rod that I had to use. So I basically just got a piece of hardwood, some boat arc, drilled a hole in it, and shoved my rod through that, and that worked excellently. And I can rotate this at any angle that I want, so it's very low tech. And my whole idea in starting out with this project is getting something that all of us could use, not something that would require a special kind of equipment that only a few people could adapt this technique to. Go ahead, Mike. Now, as you see, I put the hole in so the cutting tip was just below the center of the lathe, Mike. And so it's just a little bit below the center line. And so here I'm set up now. I've got the board. It's reversed now, so the dovetail, of course, is on the back, and I've got my reference line. And again, that's just another angle of the cutting tool. Okay, Mike. And now I've smoothed this off, made the dovetail again, and then you have to reverse that to put it onto your tool. I'm sorry, onto the lathe. And now I've scribed. This is either my first or second circle to get the first or second cut. The other thing in order to get the angle is to use an angle gauge. This was somewhat confusing when I was looking at the literature because some of the people were talking about 60 degrees, other people were talking about 30 degrees, and the problem is, what are you using as a reference? If you're using the board as a 0 reference, or if you're using a perpendicular as a 0 reference, it's going to change by 90 degrees. And so after I figured out what they were trying to talk about, and I was getting confused with the angles, I just settled that I would make the perpendicular 0 degrees. And so over here, we're talking about maybe 25-degree angle. And I found out that I was accurate enough if I hold this angle gauge flat up against the board and then just eyeball it, make sure this shaft is parallel to that shaft. That's close enough. So that will give me the angle. And I'm probably accurate within 1 or 2 degrees. So I can vary this by 5 degrees, just making sure that the two lines are parallel with each other. This shows the second ring that I've cut. I'm putting it now on top of the other board so I can then get my reference to cut the next ring, ring number 3. So you have to number the boards. Right, I just label odd or even, 1 or 2, black and white. It doesn't make any difference, just so you keep them straight, so you're alternating. And then take the ring that you've just cut, after you've cleaned it up a little bit, superimpose it upon the other board, draw your ring, and then go ahead and cut your ring on the second board. And then take, again, that ring, bring it back to the first board, and keep on alternating back and forth. So here's ring 3 that I've cut, and it shows that it's about 5/8 of an inch thick. And when you're doing segmented pieces, most of the time guys will cut their segmented pieces about 1 inch thick or 3/4 of an inch, so you have enough leeway. Because even when you try to line this up, and that's one of the biggest problems, is lining up these rings so it's symmetrical. And where I've gotten into trouble where it's been just a little bit off, and then you stack the next ring and you stack the next ring. Each time you stack it, it gets a little bit more off and a little bit more off, and then pretty soon you're getting a wide section on the bowl and a very skinny section. And make sure you wear your face mask, because some of these bowls have exploded on me until I realized you had to be really careful about lining it up. But at any rate, this is a 5/8 degree overlap. This is the 4th ring, 3/4 inch overlap. And it's just showing that this is ring 4 I'm cutting out on the even board, so the even rings go with the even boards. And now I've started to cut ring number 5 out. And I'm just about through. The point of the cutting tool has cut through. You can see the yellow part of my Powermatic lathe coming through just before it separated. And now here I've stacked up the rings to each other. You can see now I've taken a flat board that I've made. It's now about 6 inches deep. You then have to take each ring and flatten it out, just like you do with segmented pieces. You could put them on a cold jaw. Or what I found works a little bit better for me is to use some MDF, and I put in some concentric pencil lines on it, and then I put a finish on it to protect the pencil lines. And then I use some double sticky tape with each ring, stick it on to this board. And the next one. And then use a long piece of wood, probably about 3 inches long, just a flat board, and some coarse sandpaper. And if you hold it against both sides of the ring, you'll be able to get it flat. If you hold it against one side of the ring, you might make a slight angle. If you hold it up against both sides, it's a good technique that they use in segmented turning to keep the rings nice and flat. And here you see me putting the board there, and the next one is a little bit more clear. Now, be sure you wear your mask, because the edge of this ring can be very sharp, and especially if you're using a technique with double sticky tape. Sometimes it's come loose, and that ring will shoot across the room or hit you in the face mask. So be sure you wear your safety equipment. And that's a self-portrait of me when I was working one day. Let's see. This is a vise that I made. It's just simply a 5/8 inch threaded rod. When I'm gluing the rings together, I'll put the rings on top of some MDF material, slide a piece of scrap wood that has a hole, drill through it down there, and then screw the nut on and clamp it down, and that makes an excellent vise for putting these rings together. Now, when you finally get down to the bottom, of course, there's no hole in it, so then you have to go with a different technique to glue the bottom board up using standard vices. And that's the board, or I'm sorry, that's the bowl stacked up with its glued together. And that's with it upside down. And it's on the lathe now, getting ready to turn it and smooth out all those rings. And that's the finished bowl. So that's basically the idea. This is that bowl. So you can see what it can look like afterwards. Oh, sorry. There we go. Let's see. There we are. Oh, there we are. So you can see the rings. And so that's some of the idea. Now, on one of the bowls over there, you see I combined the technique where I did the rings, and then I also made a segmented ring and inserted that in, just to give it a little variation. Now, that probably wouldn't look good with these stripes that I have here, but using just a plain mahogany, I then did a segmented ring. Oh, thank you, John. So this is basically just a plain mahogany board, and to give it a little character, I put in a segmented ring in between the rings. So you can make it as varied as what you would like. One of the other things is that these boards, these blanks that we have to make bowls with, well, that's the way this bowl started off with. So by using this technique, you can make a deeper and maybe nicer bowl than just a little shallow bowl. So I just made a single ring, stacked it on top, and that way you can make a deeper bowl with maybe a little bit more feature to it. Now, over here, if we can get the camera down, this is a bowl in progress. I have made this twice as long as it is wide. I've cut out the rings from both sides. I took the ring from board 1 and laid it on top of the second board to give me my dimensions so I knew where to make the inner cut on board 2. I then took board 2, brought it back over here, lined it up, and that gave me the inner circle and the cutting line for board 3. Took 3, superimposed it over here to make number 4. And same thing with number 5. And what I'm going to do now is to take ring number 5 and turn ring number 6. So what I'm going to do is line this up, and these various lines, my reference line tell me that I'm getting it at the same side, and the cross pieces of wood are very helpful in getting this to line up to make sure that I'm getting this concentric, feeling around the edge, making sure that's all pretty good. I'll make a little reference line here. And I'll get ready to do a little bit of turning for you. So you can get a little bit of an idea about how this bowl is starting to shape up. I'll slide in my fancy tool holder. Let's see. I'm going to go ahead and make a reference line. Can we get the camera? Oh, okay. Now I have a reference line that I made, but I want to make sure that it's symmetrical all the way around in case I had it a little bit off center. I'm going to hold that on the line that I made. There we go. I'm going to set up my tool holder And this is set at 45 degrees, which is what I wanted to make my last ring. So I'm going to hold it parallel to that. Okay, that's pretty parallel now. I don't know if you did you do an overhead shot, Mike? Okay, good, okay. And it's on the line. I'm going to bring it in just a little bit. Proud of that line. Okay. So that's pretty close. Okay. Now, I found from experience that you want your lathe speed to be about 450 to 490 RPMs. I usually like to turn a whole lot faster than that, but this generates an awful lot of smoke and heat, and so if I go a whole lot faster than that, if I go over 500, then it's just too much friction. So what I'll do is make sure that my point is not engaged. I'll turn the lathe on, bring it up to speed, and then I'll start cutting. Now it does get hot, so I put my glove on. I'm sorry? I usually do. Thank you for reminding me. And that's about 480. And since this is a smaller diameter circle, that'll be fine. Now I've got a little arrow on the top of my post and a little reference line on my tool so that I'm sure that I don't have it upside down or sideways. For some reason, wiggling seems to help. And now I'll go ahead and just take a piece of sandpaper and just smooth this out a little bit. And now this is my 6th ring. I'll put this back on the other bottom blank, and I'll line up the wood. Ring 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1, and there's the bowl. Now, one of the things I found is I had a lot of leftover blanks. So, not wanting to waste wood, I decided they would make rather pretty coasters. So, questions? So, it's a little bit different technique. Yes? There is a technique, but in order to do that, you actually have to cut the bowl in half and do 1/2 ring at a time, because obviously to cut the inside, you have to cut through the outside, and then you can glue it up. So yes, you can do that. You can tilt your bandsaw table at an angle, 30 degrees, 45 degrees, and cut it, and then glue it up. But this way, you don't have any cut through the ring. Yes? It's difficult to tell because as a part-time turner, since I have a real job, you know, and it takes some time for the glue, but I figured it out, and the gluing process to glue up some boards takes about 3 hours for me to cut up some boards and get them ready to glue them up. And then cutting out each ring probably takes me a good 3-4 hours to cut up about 6 rings. And then, you know, you got the sanding and the flattening process. Each one of these rings has to be flattened and trued up so that there won't be any gaps when you do glue it together. So, you know, it does take a little bit of time, but just like with segmented turning, you know, I just think it's, I don't know that it's better than segmented turning. It's just a different way to make a bowl where you don't have to cut all those little angles. But then again, with the other bowl that I had, if you want, you can superimpose, you know, just get an unattractive piece of maple and then cut a fancy segmented ring in the center of it, which would make it look, you know, quite nice, and you have some sort of a decoration in it. Now, the finish that I put on, just started to use this Minwax water-based polyacrylic, and it comes in gloss, semi-gloss, and satin finish. And so what I've put on most of these bowls is first a layer of shellac. That's considered like a universal sealer. So after I have the bowls all sanded down, I'll just seal it with a coat of the shellac, and that dries very quickly. And then I can go ahead and use this water-based Minwax. One of the reasons why I use this finish is because, to me, these are salad bowls. You can put fruit in them or nuts or whatever you want, but if somebody's using it as a salad bowl, you want a finish that's going to hold up to being wet. So that's why I use the poly-type finish, so that you can put salad dressing in there and it's not going to hurt it. And you know, I thought it leaves a pretty nice finish. It dries enough to put a second coat on within an hour or two, so you can put 3-4 coats on in a single day, and by the following morning, it's almost ready to use. I rarely do. After the shellac, I'll just sand with that fiber material, not sandpaper, just to knock off any little nibs and make it smooth to the hand with the shellac, and then I'll go ahead and put the poly on. And I also found if I use a base of shellac, I can then use a magic marker, put my name on the base of it with a kind of wood, and then when I put the poly on top of that, that seals the magic marker in and doesn't cause the magic marker to smear.
So could you use walnut oil also?
Oh yeah, yeah, and I have used you know, tung oil walnut oil, waterlocks, finish. So you can put on whatever finish you choose. Yeah, I usually start off with 30 degrees. I have started off with as low as 15 in some of my earlier bowls, but I think that's too vertical. So I certainly would not go any further or any less of an angle than 25 degrees. And this bowl is 30 degrees. You can come up and take a look at it, and I've labeled each ring. Ring 1 is 30 degrees, ring 2 is 30, and then made 2 rings out of 40 and 2 rings out of 45. So I changed every other ring to make this particular shape. So, but you can certainly start off 30, 35, 40, 45. It depends somewhat. This ring, I've got a pencil mark, and you can see that's only like about 3/8 of an inch, so that's not very thick. And I have run into some problems if it's slightly off center that I've gotten a little too thin in a couple of bowls and have several pieces of wood lying around the shop. So you have to be real careful. But the others, you can see, has got a fairly thick overlap. I've got the full overlap on most of these other pieces, which gives you the leeway that you need to get away from slight variance and also to smooth this down. But you have to be very conscious about the outside angle as well as the inside angle, so you don't cut too far into it, because again, you're not dealing with a real thick piece of wood. It's almost always less than a full inch. Well, thank you.